What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 652. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, right out of the car, into the house, into his podcasting seat, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, how are you? How's your day?
Oh, I'm doing great. It's a good day.
Okay, I like hearing that. We've got we've got a really interesting topic here that kind of ripped off, but we're going to adapt for Magic. So it'll be cool. It's going to be the traits of successful gamblers, but we're going to kind of translate to Magic players. We've done a similar topic like this before, but this one is going to be traits that were found by other people. And in fact, a specific person named Nate Silver. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. Before we do, let's talk about our sponsors, channelfireball.com, place to go for all of your Magic needs. Also other games, Pokemon, Flesh and Blood, Yu-Gi-Oh! If you're into other TCGs, you're going to find cards and merchandise and stuff at Channel Fireball as well. But of course, primarily speaking to Magic players here, and you're definitely going to find that Magic is still at the core of Channel Fireball. If you need singles, you can visit the Channel Fireball marketplace. Of course, if you need sealed product or supplies or anything like that, you're going to find it over at Channel Fireball, as well as some of the best content on the planet at CFB Pro. If you're looking to get better at the game, which kind of assume you are if you're listening to this show, then you should check out CFB Pro as well. If you do not picking up anything at CFB, if you use the affiliate code LR at checkout, it helps out the show. We do appreciate it. Show is also brought to you by FTX. That's the safe, regulated place for you to buy, sell, and trade your digital assets. As we look to the future, things like these type of technologies that are emerging could become a much bigger part of our life if you want to get involved with it. FTX is an exchange. They are a place where you can go to buy, sell, and manage any of those digital assets that you may have. And if you're inside the US, it's ftx.us, and that'll get you access to the website. And then there's also an app for your phone. And outside the US, it's ftx.com. Same thing there as well. Make sure that you consult a financial advisor before doing investment of any kind, because there are risks associated with it, and you need to understand those before you do any investing. But when you're ready, ftx.com outside the US and ftx.us within is ready for you. And of course, the show is brought to you by you via the Patreon. This is like the direct way to support us. It's patreon.com/limited resources, and we really appreciate everybody who supports us there. We've got a Patreon question of the week here, Luis. This one comes from Justin, who says, if you could add one feature to MTG Arena or make one change to it, what would it be?
Honestly, a big thing that I would love to see on Arena is kind of like league play like Magic Online when it comes to Constructed. I know that there has been some special events that do that. So, I don't want to completely say there's nothing like that, but Magic Online leagues, like, I just hate the ladder. I think ladder play is just not that fun compared to something like play where there's there's stakes on the line, right? When you play a league on Magic Online, you care if you go 4-1, 5-0, 3-2. When you join the ladder, there's nothing there.
Yeah. What do you think about the ranking thing? Because I've had a chat with Ryan and you before, people that work in game design, that I never, as just a everyday gamer, Magic player, I never considered these things. But after you guys brought it up, it really kind of made me go, wait a minute, which is that, when you were playing ranked, that means that you're playing people that are at the same rank as you pretty consistently. But that can also make it feel like you're never really getting better.
Yeah, I don't mind that part so much, because I think that when there's still a fairly decent amount of variance when it comes to, who you like when you play different people on Magic Online, there's still a decent amount of variance, on Arena in terms of what the ranks or who you're playing against in terms of skill levels. So I don't think that that's a big deal, but I do think that ladder play doesn't end up feeling that satisfying is my problem. Like, you can play a lot, and after playing for a while, what do you have to show for it? And the answer often is not a whole lot. Right.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what you would change for me. If I had if I could make a wish list, it would probably be something bigger picture than what came to my mind, but I'm just going to go with what came to my mind, which is just that I can select the lands I'd like.
Yeah, no, that's legit though. I actually, if you've ever seen me stream, the first thing I do after every draft is go change the lands into the ones I want. It'd be nice to not have to do that. That's definitely a value add.
Right. And like they did do it where you can pick the sleeves you want, but I never use sleeves. But if I could just pick like some sweet lands to just always be, because I also, I don't know, this is probably just a comfort level thing or something we may touch on very, very lightly on the main topic with regards to this. But, you know, I use the same lands when I draft, when I'm playing in real life. And I like it because my brain is so attuned to those lands that like I never, ever, ever have like when I look at my opening hand, I know right away how many lands are in it. When I draw a card, I know right. Like I never have to go, wait, which one is this? There's never any confusion. There's never any like, oh man, I thought I had two swamps. How did I end up with a mountain and a swamp? Right. It's just, I'm so used to seeing those lands. And so I wouldn't hate that, you know, for when I draft on Arena as well. Thanks for the question, Justin. Let's do a crack a pack here. Luis, we're pretty deep into new Capenna now, so we can kind of cruise through it, but we'll see if there's anything interesting here. Our first card off is Tramway Station. That's the black-red dual land. There's also another dual land here. It's a waterfront district. That's the black-blue one. Either of these catch your eye as a potential early pick?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be thrilled to take either of those. I really wouldn't be thrilled to take any land first pick, but I'm not gonna be too broken up about it if I have to, because lands are good. It's good to have, you know, good mana.
Shattered Seraph.
No,
This has been a disappointing one, right?
Yeah, I don't think this one has worked out very well.
It's just a little too slow for the format. It's a good card. Like it's hard to pick it apart as like the stats or the, you know, it does the things you want to do when you want to do them late in the game. A nice big flying blocker that gains you life, helps you stabilize. But the problem is just that like if the format's going to be sort of tempo based and two drop centric, then 7 drops like this just often don't even hit the battlefield. Next is Daring Escape. God, have I ever even seen anybody cast this spell? Maybe once. It's the red instant that gives a creature +1/+0 on first strike and you scry one.
Yeah, I think it's clearly fine in the sense that it's a decent combat trick. I have had people cast it against me, but it's not a good card.
I think the one time that somebody actually cast it against me, they did it on their end step or on my end step, just to try to scry to find something. We talked about Maestro's Initiate quite a bit last week. That's what we've got here. Unfortunately, just doesn't stack up well with the format. Capenna Express, another card that doesn't really work, primarily due to the fact that the red-green treasures deck, I have to put it in like air quotes because it just isn't really a deck.
That deck never really came together.
Never came together, yeah. So 3 and a green, 6/6 vehicle, and you can crew it for 3, or you can sack a treasure to crew it, basically. So no, Run Out of Town. Yeah. Hey, I play this card, you know, this card makes the cut more often than not. Yeah. It's like actually fine blue removal. Same thing with Hold for Ransom, 1 and a white, the pacifism effect. Definitely solid.
That's currently the front runner, I would say.
Yeah. It's between those last 2 cards. We're saving the best for last. Next is Paragon of Modernity. That ended up being not good at all.
No, that's the flyer that, you can pay 3 to pump it, but if you pay 3 different colors, it's +1/+1. Mm-hmm. And I have had games where it's like, okay, but yeah, no, it's not a card I would really recommend.
Maestro's Theater is our last common. So probably still in that same category that you mentioned before of not really wanting to pick one of these. So you like Hold for Ransom as your number 1 pick here?
I would take Hold for Ransom over any of the lands. Yeah.
Okay. Uncommons, Obscura Charm. This is the white, blue, black instant. Choose target multicolored permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard. Return target, blah, 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 from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So you get back a multicolored, smaller thing. You can counter an instant or sorcery spell, or you can destroy a creature or planeswalker with mana value 3 or less.
Obscure Charm is good. Like I'll always play it, and I'll even sometimes splash for it. I don't know that it's good enough that I would play it over just taking a Hold for Ransom. I suspect I would just take Hold for Ransom to start with.
I think so too. You know, it's interesting because when you compare Obscura Charm to the others, you know, this one does have perhaps a little bit more by way of flexibility, but it gives up some in the in the ultimate power of the card, right? Like get back something, but it has to be small and multicolored. Kill something, but it has to be smaller. Counter something, but it has to be an instant or sorcery. So there's a lot there. Like you're basically always going to be able to do something with it, but its ceiling actually isn't that high. Where with other ones, better removal, card draw, stuff like that, can do a little better. So I would definitely take Hold for Ransom over it. Next is interesting. It's Exotic Pets. That's the 1 blue-white instant that makes 2 1/1 blue unblockable fishes, and one of them can pick up a counter of a type of counter you already have on a different creature.
Oh, I love Exotic Pets. I think this card is awesome. Yeah? I would certainly be taking this card.
Would you consider Julie an exotic pet?
No, she's about as common as it gets.
Okay, but this is where you'd pick here currently. Yeah. All right. This is a card. And I have, remind me at the end of the crack pack, I have my draft video for CFB should be going up shortly. And I had a very interesting pick early, and I want to get your take on it. But this one is Sizzling Soloist. This is the 3 and a red 3/2 with Alliance. You can make a creature not be able to block, and if you Alliance again, you can make that creature attack you the next turn.
I think it's just okay.
It's just okay, right?
Yeah, I'm not super thrilled about it. Like, it's the kind of card that if you're losing and then they play this card, you're like, wow, I'm really dead.
Yes.
But it's pretty bad when behind, and even at parity, it doesn't always do it. Plus, it's like kind of expensive for a creature that often will just die.
Yeah. Anytime a card has Alliance, the more expensive it gets, the less likely you are to get to abuse its Alliance, right? Like the Fencer's another similar example. So that's an issue. Okay. So your least favorite family is Riveteers?
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to put you to the test a little bit here and see how far down you'll go. We've got Ziatora's Envoy. So this is not the mythic, but this is the rare. It's 1 black, green, red, 5/4 trample with blitz for 2 black, green, red. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, look at the top card of your library. You may play a land from the top of your library or cast a spell with mana value less than or equal to the damage dealt from the top of your library without paying its mana cost. If you don't, you put that card into your hand. So it's a bomb, right? I mean, this card's great.
Yeah, it is very good. I would kind of recall the showdown where I did first pick this card despite not being like stoked to do so. Okay.
And was that though because you also didn't want to pass it, or would you have done that? I guess we're asking right now. Would you do that in a 8-player league?
I mean, I think I would take Exotic Pets over Ziatora's Envoy, but I would have also done that in the showdown.
Okay.
Like, past Mr. Metronome, or I don't remember who else passed to me. I think it was Tupperware actually, but no, it was Metronome. The Ziatora showdown Envoy, take the Exotic Pets, and then kind of be mindful of what red, green, black stuff I was passing. But
I think I would take Ziatora's Envoy, pack 1, pick 1 here. I don't know. It's close. I'm with you. I like pets a lot. I always feel like, ooh, we got one, when I get it. Very flexible card.
I think pets are just so good. I would just play being only in 2 colors and my 2 favorite colors, but I think the color pair I draft the most.
Yes.
Pretty easy sell over the color trio I draft the least.
Okay. So. All right. Well, I'm going to put you to a test. So there's our Crack-a-Pack, but
I already did. You only get a certain number of tests, per
here's
show.
the problem. You passed that test. So now you got to take the next one. It's like being on the ladder, right? Like
that is how tests work, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So I did the draft and I opened up I don't remember what it's called, but the Kraken, right? 2 blue, 6/6 trampler.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, sweet, right? Like this color I'm happy to be in. I'm going to take the Kraken. Everything's great. And then as I scanned the pack, I saw, of course, the very best common in the whole set staring me down. What do you take? The Overseer. What do you take?
I would take the Kraken. I think the Kraken's really good.
I took the Overseer. I don't know if it was correct.
That's unreasonable for what it's worth.
Yeah, I was like, the fact that I was having a conversation about it, goes back to the conversations that you and I have had on the show about the Overseer. But which we've covered, but like I ended up talking myself narrowly into the Overseer over the Kraken. I don't know if that was correct or not, but how crazy is that, right? I mean, Kraken's really good.
So Inspiring Overseer has a slightly higher win rate than Kraken at games in hand win rate. So there we go.
That's unbelievable. Anyway, so there we go. I'm a genius.
So I want to mention something here while on the topic of Inspiring Overseer, because it's come up a few times. I know we've talked about this, but people are like, why is Inspiring Overseer such a big deal? Why is everyone making such a hullabaloo about it when Cloud Conceer was in M15?
Yeah.
M14, I don't remember which M it was.
Which was
the
same card,
M20.
but no life gain, and it was blue, right?
Yeah, 2 blue, 2/1 flying, ETB draw card versus 2 white, ETB flying, or 2/1 ETB flying draw card, also gain 1. And the biggest difference and the thing that I think people really should take into account is that Inspiring Overseer is not only in a color that's much more suited for aggression, it's also the extra life does matter. Like it is relevant. And we're in a format that being easy to cast is such a premium. So
sure.
All those things combined, I think, really make it so that, yeah, this card is better, quite a bit better than Cloud Conceer. I mean, Cloud Conceer but white would have been already a lot better, and that's kind of where we're at, right?
Right, that makes sense. But that point you made, very, very relevant here, right? Because that's come up a lot of times for us when we've talked about what cards at common and uncommon for perhaps that we would take over Cloud Conceer, and there's numerous triple colored cards that were like, but Cloud Conceer, it's not that I necessarily just want to take Cloud Conceer because it's easier to cast. It's just a better Magic card. And then you just get spotted being so much easier to cast, right? And we have to remind too that it's not just about being able to put it on the stack, right? It's also about when you take a monocolored card in booster draft, that leads you towards potential different families that you could take. Right. Where when you take like, Brazen Upstart or whatever it's called, right? The Cabaretti triple colored card. I mean, you're either Cabaretti or you're splashing it or you're not playing it. And when you take Inspiring Overseer, well, that's not true. You could be Obscura, you could be Cabaretti, you could be the other white one. You can do, brokers, right? You can go down a bunch of different roads. So you actually have a higher chance of playing it, and it's more flexible in that way too. So you're kind of getting paid off there. And then of course, when it's in your deck and you draw it in your hand, you're getting paid off because you can actually, cast the stupid thing. Wow. An all-timer. I wonder if we need to, would it be possible for us to make a list of best commons ever? It's such a massive.
You want to put a stop at a certain year because, Fireball used to be common. Pestilence used to be common. Pestilence actually got reprinted at common 7 years after the original time, which you think they would have learned by then. But even if Rolling Thunder and Tempest, red, X, deal X divided as you choose. But even if you set aside, even if you said, hey, 2010 forward or something like that, or whatever, you could still get a pretty ridiculous kind of list going.
Okay, well, we'll talk about that because that might be interesting and to see where a card like Overseer stands. We may want to give ourselves a little bit of a breather from Overseer first so that we don't go, recency bias too hard because it's in our head. But I tell you, it'd be on a list. It's up there. And interestingly, Luis, I think that if we did make that list, let's say we made it in a year, I think that the point that you just made is one that we would really, because the raw power level is sort of self-explanatory, but it would be, this was in a triple colored set, that let you be more flexible and let you cast it way more often. Okay, let's get to our main topic, Luis. So I was listening to a podcast where Nate Silver was a guest. Now, Nate Silver, for those who don't know him, is the guy behind 538.com, which is originally got famous or mainstreamed or whatever because of election results, elections modeling. So they would model US elections using algorithms and AI and stuff like that to try to predict outcomes, that type of thing. And they did a really good job a couple of elections in a row and kind of became at least one of the places that people go to look. But it turns out that the guy behind it, Nate Silver's also just a very analytical, very smart person who he reminds me a lot of a Magic player, like a sort of a competitive Magic player archetype, if you will. He also is a poker player, played very seriously for a while, plays what he calls recreationally now, but he's still, really good. And he's writing a book. And for part of the research that he's doing for the book, he came up with he's working on a list of traits of successful gamblers. This is how he put this out. Now, he said that the book's still very much kind of being conceptualized and researched and stuff. So it's early. He's not exactly sure what it's going to be exactly, but he's gone around and talked to people that he defined as gamblers. And the way that he defined them, I think, was really important, which was he talked to people who had actual skin in the game, as we say it, themselves, meaning people like poker players, people like sports bettors. There's various gamers, I think, that would meet this description, though he didn't mention that specifically. And also entrepreneurs, so people that start companies, and investors, so people that invest in companies or in whatever. But he specifically said, I don't mean people who manage risk or who manage assets or manage things on behalf of somebody else. I'm talking about people who do their own, like their own money, like right. Is in play, right? And so that's the type of person that he's talking about. And at the time of the podcast, he had come up with 11 traits that he felt that he started to see real trends for the people that he had talked to. And so I thought it would be fun, Luis, for you and I to go over those traits and see how many of them compare or translate to Magic players or playing Magic or getting better at Magic, because it's an interesting parallel, because when you play Magic, you're generally risking very little, right? Like the most you could really risk is, like for our listeners, is like the money that it costs to play a draft that you might lose the draft and not get much or any of that back. And so it's gone, right? Well, go ahead.
I have a, I wouldn't say objection, but I do think that that's not the entire story. If you want to talk about professional Magic.
Okay, sure. No, throw that in there. I want to hear that side.
So, while it's true, if you have a professional poker player who has a bad year can find themselves many hundreds of thousands of dollars in the hole, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
When they sign up for a poker tournament, they risk $5,000 or $10,000. When they sit down in a cash game, they risk, again, much more than that, depending on the stakes they're playing. So, in that sense, yes, Magic. The highest buy-in Magic tournament I've ever played was probably like $1,000, and that's atypical. And the Magic tournaments I play in that have the highest rewards have no entry fees because you've already earned those entry fees,
right?
At tournaments, prior tournaments. The part that I think makes it real and makes it feel like you have skin in the game, because you do, is the opportunity cost. That
right. You could have been working as a programmer for that whole year or whatever.
Right. Well, not even just that, because that part's true. Yes, you could be doing something other than Magic, but look at it this way. If I'm a professional poker player, I can join a tournament effectively every hour of every day, right? Mm-hmm. Like if you only play live and don't play online, then maybe you're a little more restricted. But in general, your bankroll is actually mostly determines like how many tournaments or how much time you want to spend determines how many tournaments you can enter. If I'm a pro Magic player, how many meaningful tournaments can I play in a year?
That's right.
I can play in 4 Pro Tours. If I do well in those, I can play at Worlds. I can play. I'm going to use the old system because that's the one that most Magic pros actually spent the most time in. You can play as many Grand Prix you could basically play as many Grand Prix as you wanted because there were so many at the peak. Mm-hmm. But the rewards weren't really there. When I go and play a Pro Tour and do poorly, I don't really think of like, oh man, I lost $800 on a plane ticket and $500 on a hotel, all that stuff. I think I lost the opportunity to get a bunch of pro points to advance my career. It's kind of like when you blow a job interview, you don't feel like, oh man, what I really missed out on was the like $2 in gas it took to get here and the $25 I paid to dry clean my suit. You think I missed out on an opportunity here. I don't get to retake that job interview. I don't get that job.
Right.
For Magic players, if you go and do badly at the Pro Tours, you don't get to go to Worlds. In fact, you do badly enough, you don't even get to play Pro Tours anymore. So while I don't disagree that the buy-ins, like the money isn't there, but there still is, I think, a very similar skin in the game, because think about the aspiring Magic Pro back when that was a more feasible thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
If you do what you qualified for the Pro Tour, you spend a lot of time, effort, money, labor, and like emotional cost, right? Like you poured your heart and soul into it. If you do well at this Pro Tour, you might be able to get that gig writing for Channel Fireball or Star City. You will be qualified for another Pro Tour. You might be able to even get on a pro team, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
If you do badly, a lot of those things are going to be harder or not accessible to you. So
even if the monetary reward directly for that tournament isn't there, you have huge amount of skin in the game.
Yeah, and even more so, even if there isn't a big monetary loss, like at poker tournaments, the opportunity cost of playing at a tournament isn't that you could have played in a different tournament that often. Like it's mostly the entry fee, right?
Yes.
You lose $5,000. For Magic, it's that you don't get there very many shots at this. And this is where you have it. And by the way, I want to say skin in the game is one of the most powerful concepts. And I don't know if you know who Nicholas Taleb is, but he wrote The Black Swan. Like he's very similar to Nate Silver, though he's very abrasive on Twitter. He gets in fights with people all the time. Seems like kind of an ass, but he's a very like. His approach to thinking is very interesting. And one of his big concepts he always harps on is people don't have enough skin in the game. Judges don't have skin in the game. Prosecutors don't have skin in the game. Like the outcomes of the things they're doing don't affect them that much. And that's where you get problems, right? When people are making rules that don't really apply to them, that they don't like, they're not really punished or rewarded for doing, a good job or whatever. That's where you get a lot of mismatched in terms of having the wrong outcomes. And look, if you were told, hey, Marshall, you got to pick the winner of the next basketball game, and you're like, okay, what for? You're like, no, just pick the winner. We're going to make a friendly bet, but we're not putting any money on the line.
Yeah.
You'd probably just pick the team you cared about most, right?
Yeah. I probably just whatever came to my mind. Yeah.
Right. Or just random if it's two teams you don't care about.
Yeah.
If it's like, okay, Marshall, you have to bet $1,000 on the next basketball game. What are you going to do?
Right.
Well,
I'm researching.
You're going to do some research. You're going to pick the team you think is going to win. You're forced, because you have skin in the game, to make a better decision in that sense. And the same is true. Like at the end of the day, it's like we've had this come up for Pro Tours. Sometimes you have a testing team, right? And you're testing, and you have some people there who maybe aren't qualified for the Pro Tour, but they're kind of helping you test. Yeah, this is a kind of common occurrence. When it comes down to it, those people's opinions matter less. And it's not because they're not trying their hardest or they don't want to be helpful. They're very helpful, right? They're playing games with you and stuff. At the end of the day, they don't have to pick a deck.
Yes.
You have to pick a deck. If I'm deciding what to play and Martin Juzo's like, I'm going to play mono red. I'm like, wow, you must believe in this. You're going to enter the tournament with mono red. You've got skin in the game. If someone who's testing with us but not playing in the Pro Tour, let's say they're playing at the Grand Prix because both are happening at the same time, and there's like a sealed Grand Prix and a Pro Tour, right? Those happen the same weekend.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, if I were playing, I would play mono red. It's like, okay, that's not literally worth nothing. It's not worth that much.
But maybe you wouldn't. Yeah.
Yeah. But, and at the end of the day, like, knowing someone is invested in the outcome of something is one of the more powerful things that you
That's an awesome subtopic for this. And it goes right to, I think it's why Nate Silver said that at the front of his thing. Like, look, I'm talking to people who it's their money riding. And he specifically said, like, I didn't want to talk to people who manage money on behalf of other people where they're sort of fed a game plan and then they're just sort of expected to execute the game plan. They have to come up with the game plan. If you
want to hear the ultimate skin in the game example?
Yeah.
There was a team of death row inmates who are on a baseball team, a prison baseball team. Okay. And they got to play against other teams. And as long as they kept winning, they were not going to be executed. They had a really good record.
Is this
like,
wow.
And this was like a long time ago,
That's intense.
But like, can you imagine? Like, who's going to play harder? A team who, if they lose, they might die, or a team who, like, they got their paycheck. Obviously, they'd rather win than lose. Like but it's like when your back's against the wall, and this is why it's worse when, like, for sports leagues, when you have a team who's playing for the playoffs and a team who doesn't matter if they win or lose. The person who has more skin in the game, just like, they're gonna go that extra mile. They're gonna push that extra amount, and they're gonna make the decision that's gonna be best for them to win the game. They have no other considerations.
I think one other, but before we get to the points here, because I really like this topic, like this is something we haven't touched on before, but I think is really relevant in a lot of ways throughout life and Magic and stuff as well, is it is really interesting when you're on the other side of a fence that you hadn't been on before. A good example would be like me doing the content creation thing full time, right? Before I did it, I remember thinking like, oh, I would do it this way, or I would do that. Or, other people would say, why isn't this person doing this? And I'd be like, yeah, why aren't they doing that? And then you get on the other side of it where like you have to figure it out and you have to be the one to actually make that decision. And all of a sudden when people throw out, you should do it this way, it's like, you haven't thought this through at all. Like you have no idea what the risks are that I would be taking. And it's not just for me personally or content creators. You see this a lot when people criticize businesses that they like to interact with. Wizards is one that takes a lot of crap, and tons of businesses do, right? Why don't they just do this? Oh, I don't understand why Wizards doesn't do that. And I'm substituting Wizards in for whatever store you're complaining about, whatever sports entity, whatever it is that's got you riled up on that day. And I will tell you, until you have skin in the game yourself, it is really hard to imagine what it feels like to risk your own personal well-being, your own personal money, your own that type of stuff. I recommend everybody starting something. It doesn't have to be huge. It can be something small, but where your decisions actually dictate on some level, right? I mean, we all know that there's a healthy amount of luck, there's a healthy amount of circumstance and help, and there's all these different things that factor in. But where you are at least saying, I am the one where the buck stops with me, and I'm going to make a website, or I'm going to make a YouTube channel, or I'm going to make a blog, or I'm going to start a small business, or I'm going to do a little eBay business, or whatever it is. But the decisions that I make are going to affect the outcome of this in a strong way. And then you go, oh, there's a lot more here than I used to realize when I yelled at the company I worked at because I didn't think that they did something right, And I think that we're going to see some of that come out in this list as well. Let's keep that one on the back burner too, Luis. I think the skin in the game thing we might be able to expand on even further. But for now, let's get into the points that he made. And he started off by making some that were a little bit more, he considered them obvious. But let's just go through them. So the first one is, and I think this one is, it might be the number one, is they think probabilistically. So again, these are the traits of successful gamblers, and we're translating these into Magic where applicable, but also I just think a lot of it translates over anyway. They think probabilistically, Luis. How important is that to, like, I'll give you an example. If I talk to somebody about Magic and I recognize that they don't think in this way, I'm kind of out. Like, I don't really respect their opinion anymore, because people who are, what's the word when you're not probably binary?
Result oriented?
No, not that. I mean, like where they're like,
well, being result oriented is actually part of this too.
It is. And that will actually come up here too. But what I mean by probabilistically thinking versus not, I think it's binary is what I was looking for, right? Where if my opponent, if let's say a friend says, hey, here's a game of Magic I played, what would you do in this spot? I'll look at it and I'll say, look, it's pretty likely given what we know here that your opponent has a combat trick. How bad is that for you? It's really bad. We can't put exact numbers on it, but let's say it's like all signs are pointing to that this has happened. So I'm going to call it 80-20, right? 75-25, like a high likelihood, however you want to describe that. So I would play as if they had it and continue to do so until I received information that made me think that they really didn't have it. That would be the way I'd want to break it down. You will hear people say, well, they obviously have the combat trick. And that's like, well, no, they might not. And there may be a spot where you need to take your 20% chance because you're not beating it anyway, or things are going off the rails or whatever. And where that 20% chance when they don't have it actually matters and you need to act on it, right? If I hear you, I broke that down into arbitrary numbers that I just came up with. Most players don't assign numbers to these things because they know it's just a bit too much of a guess. And if I told you 75-25 versus 80-20, that that's just random guesswork and not really actionable. But likelihood, right? I hear you talk about it in these terms all the time, Luis, where it's like not likely, very likely, something like that, right? And I know for sure that you think in this way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a reason I think that Nate Silver had this as his first point, because if you thinking this way is so ingrained in not only how I think, but in how almost all the people I interact with think.
Yes,
because those are the kind of people I tend to like interacting with. Of it's not will it rain tomorrow. I mean, yes, on the one hand, it is binary. Like if it's raining tomorrow, then it rained, and if it's not raining, it didn't rain. And to some degree, it's like, well, I can see whether it's raining in the morning, so I'll decide whether to bring an umbrella and put on a jacket. But realistically, it's not 50-50. The old joke is it's either 50-50. It happens or it doesn't.
Exactly. I was thinking of that just now too.
There's two things going on here. One is that almost everything can be expressed in terms of a percentage. And you have to be really comfortable not knowing exactly what that percentage is, but being able to do your best to estimate it. And that is where you end up getting, a lot of the value of being able to think about things in the right way.
That's right. And, by the way, worth noting, what you said at the beginning there was exactly what Nate Silver said, which is he said, this is table stakes for this type of work. Like if you're going to be dealing with gambling or uncertainty, you absolutely must think probabilistic. Like if you don't think this way, I don't even know how you can really even approach it. Right. And the way that this comes out a lot in terms of magic, right, is separating out your emotion. Sometimes it feels like you're going to lose, but you must act as if you're not. And I don't mean act like personality. I mean, assume this situation comes up all the time, right? You can't beat a card, Yeah.
You make a play and someone's watching over your shoulder and you're like, well, this only has, I think this is only 20% likely to work. And they're like, well, why did you do that? It's like, well, the alternative is 100% that I'm going to lose.
Yes.
So,
yes. But to that person, it looks reckless
to figure it out.
Right. But you have to think in this way, if you're willing to. The other thing, and he touches on this a little bit more in depth later, but you also have to be willing to take risks on that uncertain basis. And you have to be comfortable with uncertainty in general. And I think that these are extremely, I agree with him as this applies to magic as well, which is that this is what they call table stakes. Like if you can't get your head around thinking probabilistically, being comfortable with uncertainty and being willing to take risks on an uncertain basis, in other words, it feels rocky, it feels unsafe, it feels like this might not work, but you decide sometimes that you should do it anyway, you're going to have a really hard time getting that extra percentage at magic, because you can do the 80% play, we'll call it. That's what Ben calls it. The kind of the standard line, use up all your mana, get maximum damage in, that type of stuff. But where one of the first dividing lines between really experienced professional players and just very good players is they're willing to do what Luis just described, which is take what looks like an absolutely crazy line to try to scoop up a little bit of equity, even though they know it's unlikely to work. It's just the other side of it is even less likely to work.
I mean, the rule of thumb that we talk about all the time is the more you're winning, the riskier or the less risky plays you want to make.
Yes.
The more you're losing, the riskier the plays you want to make. And that, in order to make those decisions, you do obviously have to make some estimate of probability, right?
Yes.
You do have to have an understanding of, am I winning? If I don't know that, then how can I even make the other decision? And the other decision also leads you to make a lot of, counterintuitive plays where you're like, yeah, I think I'm losing, so I'm going to make a play that's only 5% to work out. They have to exactly have 2 lands in hand and a land on top of their deck. What are the odds of that? Well, it's low, but I'm losing this game. I don't want to lose in 3 turns. I don't want to lose at all. Here I can actually win. Whereas a lot of people make the choice that lets them lose in 3 turns and feel better about it.
That's right. And I've seen these things happen time and time again in my time doing coverage, and this is where a game looks like it's kind of in the middle, right? It's like, okay, one player's pulling ahead and things are going okay. And then you or Huey, some amazing player will be like, okay, attack with everything. And I'm like, whoa, like what just happened, right? Like Luis is going to lose 3 creatures here and get his opponent down to 7. And then I'll do the math and be like, oh, okay, wait a second. He's gonna, if his opponent attacks him all in back, it'll get him to 1, not to 0. And then Luis has a chance to draw a combat trick, to have his opponent be completely out of gas beyond that and have a crackback for lethal, to put himself in a very high variance, risky position. But it's because Luis knows that, like, let's say that there's a card advantage engine on the battlefield and he doesn't have it, right? Or the damage race is getting away from him because there's a lifelinker on the other side of the battlefield that he can't race. He doesn't have the tools in his deck to beat it, right? And all of a sudden you'll see the big reckless play that sort of picks a fight with the opponent. And, when I've asked you or Huey about these type of plays and stuff, it's like, yeah, I mean, I just, I assessed the game and I did the thing. That, to a normal gamer, somebody less experienced, that feels awful. You're just like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing this. I'm going to attack with everything. I'm going to lose 3/4 of my board. I'm going to get them to 7 and I still have to top deck to try to win this game. I don't want to do that. Like, what if my opponent just goes, okay, play a haste creature, kill you? I'm going to feel so stupid, right? But you recognized at the correct inflection point that you weren't beating that haste creature anyway, and that you weren't going to win the game if it continued on the track that it was going. And that to me shows a lot of comfort with that uncertainty and willingness to take those risks. The next one, I'm really curious to hear your take on this one, Luis, because the next one is they are highly competitive people. So this is where I'm going to read you what he said. And again, this is in regards to people who are taking on how he defined gambling. So again, poker, sports betting, investing, starting companies, that type of stuff. And I'm curious if it translates over. So what he said is they don't settle for being average. And the reason for that usually is because average means losing. And that's actually true for most forms of gambling, right? Where if you do sports betting, they take about 10% per bet, roughly speaking, whatever it is, 5%, I can't remember. But you need to be able to win enough to beat that. In other words, if you go 50-50, you're losing. It's also true for poker in a different way. You're actually playing poker against the other players at the table, but the casino takes a small percentage of each pot that gets played to cover their costs. So if you break exactly even against your competitors, you're down a little bit. You have to be better than the rake is what it's called in poker. And then also he said that he noticed that the feeling of outsmarting the system or proving people wrong is an attraction for this type of person. So what do you see for that for Magic players? Do you think that they have to be highly competitive or that they are? Do you see this averaging thing? And what about the outsmarting part?
Well, the point of needing to finish above average is definitely true. An average finish at a Magic tournament, like to do well at a PTQ, an old school 8-round PTQ, people come in, there's 90 people playing and the winner takes the invite. Well, to make top 8, you had to go 6-1-1.
Right.
And that's well above average. And then to win, you have to go 9-1-1. You have to 3-0 the top 8. To do well at Grand Prix.
So if you went 5-3, you're like, hey, I'm a winner. But a highly competitive person's like, no, I didn't get,
5-3 in PTQ doesn't get you a whole lot.
Exactly.
And, going 12-3-1 at a Grand Prix to make top 8, that's, obviously a very good record. Same with Pro Tours. So definitely in terms of like what finishes do you need to have what you'd consider a victory? Yes, you have to finish well above average. And then the other thing is, look, just to be clear before we all talk about this, there's obviously many Magic pros aren't a monolith. Mm-hmm. I do agree with Nate's list from what I've seen in terms of like these are like it's the sort of thing where not every person is going to match all of these traits, and you can go through the list and pick off a lot of the traits. Be like, well, this person only matches 8 of the 11. Well, this is 7 of the 11, but almost all of them match a good number of them. And I can generalize well enough to say, like, yes, this is mostly correct, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, when it comes to Magic and it comes to competitiveness, a lot of the people who play Magic, this is the thing that they've been best at their entire lives.
Yeah.
It's actually funny. Like some could call it depressing. I could definitely understand that. But the reality is, I'm better at Magic than I will be at basically anything else I ever do. Like, because at one point I believe I was like the best Magic player in the world, and even if not in the top 10 or top 5, right? And how many people have played Magic? Well, a lot of people have played Magic. It's something I'm proud of.
And tried really hard to be the best.
Right. And there's a lot of things I think I'm like pretty good at. Like, I do think I'm a good game designer, for example, but I have no illusions that I've ever been the best game designer in the world, or even really close. There's some really talented people out there.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean I'm not proud of my non-Magic accomplishments, for sure. But if you think about it, like, my Magic, like, relatively to what other things I do, I'm better at Magic. And that sort of thing really can drive your it's the sort of thing that feeds itself. Where I was competitive before I played Magic. I think I've mentioned before I played Street Fighter competitively, right?
Yeah.
I always liked games where I was playing against another person. I always enjoyed those games much more than playing against the computer. I just don't play very many single player games, because it's not that I like needed to, like, you know, crush my enemy and drive them before me and make them feel bad. It's that I wanted to know I was playing against a person, because it wasn't an accomplishment to beat a computer. It's not to say there aren't games where computers are hard or they can beat you, whatever. That's not really, germane to this. But what is true is that I needed to play against an opponent for me to feel like the thing I was doing was something I really wanted to do.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I want to make sure we draw a distinction here, because I think there is a tendency when you hear that somebody's highly competitive to kind of go, like, sounds like a jerk or whatever, but that's not the case at all. Luis, you're the perfect example. You're super caring, nice person who genuinely gives a crap about other people. And you're one of the most competitive people I've ever met, period. Like, it doesn't, if we're flipping a coin to see who has to play for the Uber, you want to win that stupid coin flip. And when you don't, you're like, ugh, and it's like, and that doesn't have, a consequence for your life at all. And, and I consider myself a very competitive person too. So, you can certainly find outlets for it that doesn't make it so that you're that person, right? But that you're doing this. And then I have to say his second point, the feeling of outsmarting the system or proving people wrong is an attraction for this type of person. Look, I don't think that it's required, but this is huge in the Magic. To me, most Magic players' dream, like really deep inside, is to show up to a tournament with a deck that nobody knows about, doesn't know how it works, overlook the cards, didn't see the combo that you found and nobody else did, and you show up and clean up with it, right? You get to be the clever person who proved the system wrong. You all thought that Jund was the way to go, but I found this, right? There is something really attractive, I think, to most Magic players about being that type of person. So I see a heavy correlation there.
And some that drove their behavior more than is ideal in terms of their tournament results, but we will get to that.
I definitely know that. One question before we move to number 3. So this is Nate saying that the trends that he's seen are these traits. They're not exclusive though. Do you think, do you know any really great, call it your contemporaries, plus the level below you at the PT level who you would consider not competitive or not highly competitive? Is there anybody?
Yeah, I think that they're like few and far between.
Okay.
I can give you an example. David Ochoa Webb, He's a good friend of mine, longtime friend. He didn't actually care about winning. Like, he didn't care about the glory. He didn't care about beating other people. He liked Magic because he really enjoyed it, and it was a occupation he could do that he liked. But no, he didn't care. But he is like the in the vast minority. He's also got the accomplishment of being the only person I've ever met who actually quit Magic. He did not loudly declare he was quitting Magic. He did not say on Twitter he was quitting Magic. He didn't show up to the tournaments after he said, yeah, I'm going to do something else. He decided to become a baker. That's what he does now.
That's incredible. Yeah. I hope he's really doing well. I do miss seeing him, but yeah, that's really cool. Okay. So it is a common trend. It is not a requirement. Next one. This is big. They care about small edges. The people who are successful can compare. So, the bet sports bettors win about 54 to 57% of their bets. And does that remind you of anything, Luis? Right? The Hall of Fame Magic players are just a few percentage points above that for their career percentage against other Pro Tour level players. They're detail oriented people. I think if you're a Magic player, you're almost detail oriented by sitting down. Like, you have to know every little thing about these cards, where somebody who isn't detail oriented, it might just be like really put off by having to know every rule, every stat, every casting cost on every card. Like, those are already just details. And of course, for us, it gets way more down the detail oriented path than that. And then the average player loses money in poker and sports betting. Most people who sports bet and most people who play poker lose, right? And so what this means is that if you have a decent fundamental understanding of the thing that you're doing, whether it's poker, sports betting, or Magic, you may still be in the losing category. And what that pushes you to is to start focusing on the small edges, right? Because if you're going to be a professional or a high level player, you kind of have to understand the big stuff. If you get that wrong, you're not going to be winning anyway. But once you get that down, you look around and everybody around you knows the same stuff that you do. You start focusing on those small edges. What do you think about that with regards to Magic?
No, I mean, I think small edges are what separate the good player. They separate the average players from the good players, and definitely separate the good players from the great players.
Yeah.
Like, how many times have you seen, you're at a pro tour and you're off coverage this round, and you're kind of hanging around, the pros, right? Like, we've got our little circle going, we're chatting, and someone comes over and is like, oh man, I made a mistake, but it didn't matter. I won anyway. Like,
never.
That's not how people talk.
I punted. So this is more likely. Person comes over. How was your round? I punted. They'll tell you how they punted. And then they'll be, okay, well, what's your record now? And they'll say, oh no, I won the round. It's just, they're so detailed down that they made a mistake and they consider that a punt, but it didn't actually affect they're like, yeah, no, I mean, I won because I got luckier and my opponent screwed up, but I actually punted. That's how detail oriented they can actually be. Yeah, so that's huge.
I mean, I can just, we can just imagine Nassif is like one of the biggest. He'll come over like shaking his head like, oh man, I really screwed that one up. Did you? And he's like, well, yeah, but like I really messed up,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And like it bothers him because he strives for perfection. Of course, part of this is knowing perfection is not unattainable, right? Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, your goal is to make as few mistakes as possible, get every edge. And how often, and this is another trait, by the way, of do we come over, we're talking, and we're dissecting this game, and we're trying to figure out what went wrong or what went right or whatever. And then someone's like, yeah, but you could have actually done this. And they're like, oh, that would have been slightly better. And then you feel like you really leveled up. Yes. Because at that level, you're not going to discover something fundamental that you were doing wrong, because you wouldn't be here if that was the case.
Yes.
But you are going to discover like, oh, it's actually slightly better to scry on my upkeep instead of into turn because of whatever.
Yes, I could have waited and then kept this up, and it was free to do this. Totally. Good example here, of something that a pro would not consider detail oriented because it's actually in their rear view mirror, but it is an example of it, especially for like a non-pro player, is, let's say you're playing in the format we're in now, and you're playing brokers, and you've got Forest Island in your deck, and you're wondering, what should I play, right? And if you looked at your list, you'd say you have Civil Servant in your list, right? And so in the rare case that you go Plains, Civil Servant, or Civil Servant Plains, you need to have that forest on the battlefield. And if you're going to get it down. you know, or even you have all three colors of your mana and you haven't drawn the Silver Servant yet. You just don't play the island, right? So that you can, if you top deck the Silver Servant, you can play it on turn 2. These are similar scenarios, right? If you came over and you watched me play it, let's say you helped me build my deck, you knew what was going on with it, and you saw me play the island on turn 1, as a pro, you would be like, that's a mistake, right? You just gave away some equity. Now, as a non-pro, I might look at it and go, okay, but I mean, what are the chances I actually draw the Civil Servant and that actually would matter? And, you know, you'd have to say, well, you're right. It's 1 in 32 or 1 in 31. It doesn't happen that often. This is exactly what we're talking about. Small edges, right? Because if you get that thing down on turn 2, your win percentage actually goes up a couple of percent, which is a lot, by the way, over if you don't do anything on turn 2, which might have been what I set myself up for. These are the types of plays that happen every single game, over and over and over and over and over again. When do you cast your combat trick? What risks do you take? All that type of stuff. And so caring about small edges absolutely translates over. Like, that's probably one of the big ones. This one's interesting. He's noticed that one of the traits that he's seen is that they are contrarians, meaning that they go against the norms. He says, and this is true for Magic, the sentence that he said, but I am curious about your bigger picture view on if you feel that high-level Magic players are contrarians more than normal. He said, there can't be an edge if we all have access to the same information and we all interpret it in the same way, right? If you and I both decide, you know, we tend to agree pretty often on the show because we have a similar outlook on Magic. But if we just decide, okay, these things are all true and we're going to act accordingly, and then everybody plays exactly how we do, who has the edge there? Nobody, right?
So this is something I can definitely see it when it comes to sports betting, but I think in Magic that's actually not as true among professional players.
I feel like that kind of too.
And so the reason is that the field when it comes to sports betting is much larger, right?
Mm-hmm. Huge.
Like how there's tons and tons of people playing.
Actual millions. Yeah.
Yeah. Magic, first of all, it's smaller, right? Like the number of people who are competing for these things is smaller. But then the other thing that I think is actually really relevant is it's true that if you are playing, like right now in a really well-discovered standard format, you're not going to get as big of an edge by playing a stock deck as if you didn't, right?
Yeah.
Like there's definitely like that element to it of like, well, everyone knows what the best decks are. The pros edge is smaller because there's less new information and less stuff. But for a lot of my career, that wasn't quite as much the case.
Mm-hmm.
Like everyone didn't have the same information. It's not like there's a million sports bettors who all have access to the same stats and they're like, well, I think Miami's actually a 2.5 favorite. That's what everyone has come to the conclusion. How do I get an edge here? Man, I have to pick something that other people think is wrong. Here it's like, oh, there's just tons of incomplete information and people don't know anything. And like, we can just show up with decks. Even at the last set championship, like the Grixis Vampires deck we played was kind of out of left field. People didn't know about it and we did really well with it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we kind of don't have to be contrarians in that sense. I remember, I won't name names here, but I remember a really funny example many, many years ago.
Oh, that sounds
when
good.
we were having a sideboarding discussion with Team Channel Fireball, right? And we're like, well, we all think we should sideboard this way. And there was someone on our team who didn't think that, right? And we're like, no, we think it's really good to sideboard this way. And he's like, well, if I did that, I'd be just like you guys. And we kind of look at each other and it's like, yeah, that's good though. We win a lot. Like,
yeah. I was gonna say, you want to be like the best team going? Okay. Yeah.
And then this person was on our team and won plenty and all that. But like, that's the sort of attitude that you would want to have if there was tons of people and you weren't gonna, and you needed to do something different to get an edge. That's not the case in this particular situation, because in a sense, actually, like we were the establishment.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. But you were setting that tone.
We were the people, if you wanted to beat us, you had to do something different or riskier or whatever. that wasn't true for my whole career. Of course, I had plenty of time when I was just like, who is this guy? And I didn't have a testing team and all that stuff. And I had to like kind of break in. But like once we had the whole, like, this is Team Channel Fireball, we're all practicing together, we have good decks. Like, yeah, we ended up in a spot where like we didn't need to do anything actually crazy. So that contrariness, like, doesn't exist in the same way. That's something where gamblers and I think Magic players differ.
I agree with you. That I was skeptical of this one too. And I think that, like, to reflect it back onto our listener base, right? Just the fact that you're listening to this podcast puts you ahead of most people who draft, because you're thinking about it, you're using your brain, you're using the information and the techniques and the, skills and stuff that Luis and I try to impart on you. And you're thinking about how to become better all the time. Most players don't. Most players just sit down and draft and just sort of brute force it all the way through. And you're putting yourself out of that category. So you don't really need to go against the grain there. Just the fact that you're willing to just soak in information already, I think, puts you in a good spot. Next one is that they take shots. He said that you fail at a lot of these endeavors, so you need to be okay to get yourself kind of off the floor and get back in the game. Definitely true for Magic. You must be able to make stressful decisions under pressure and sometimes be pretty fearless about it. We talked about that just a few minutes ago in those game scenarios where you don't have all the time you want. And it might cost you the match and might cost you the tournament, but you need to be able to make that decision if it's the correct one and be kind of fearless about it, where you're just like, all right, here we go. And you do the thing that needs to be done if you decide it. And you also, and this is one that I know you're really in tune to, and it fits into this somewhat. It's more looking backwards for taking shots, but you need to be wary of selection and survivorship biases. I've seen this a lot in poker. I guess maybe somewhat in Magic as well, but a lot of people who find themselves in, doing these activities, gambling or the poker stuff, they ran hot early. I can't tell you how many players in poker that I met over the years. And I remember thinking, like, you're not very good at this. Like, this is hard for you, right? Like, you haven't moved up since I've met you. You don't really have a path. You're kind of treading water, doing some things. It's not a disaster, but like, I just remember kind of thinking like, why, how did you end up here or whatever? And then like 2 months later, I'd hear them tell a story and they'd say, oh man, when I first started playing poker, I showed up, I had no idea what I was doing. And I won the first tournament I played and I won $10,000 and I didn't even know how to play. And I just thought, hey, this is awesome. Right. And it's like crazy to think that if they had just not ran hot during that tournament, just bonked out, they might have just done something else, but they figured like, hey, this is me. And then, you start to internalize it as part of your identity. I'm a poker player. I'm a Magic player. I'm a gambler. And all of a sudden that's the world that you're in and you're doing the thing. But if you really were careful and looked back, you would have seen that it was because you got lucky early.
Well, there's a couple of things in this category. Definitely dealing with failure is something you have to do. And a good way that I described it pretty even early on in my career was like, if you go to a tournament and you're only happy when you do well in a tournament, you're going to not have a long career.
That's a great way to put it. You're just going to leave the game, right?
Most tournaments you play at, you lose. Like that's how tournaments work. Like, I don't care what it is. Like, I don't know, the last like 2 arena opens, I just like bricked badly. And that's just part of how it goes. And if you only derive satisfaction or from winning and you only think it's worth like doing if you win, then you're just not gonna play that long because you're gonna do a lot of losing. That's how it works. The other thing is that dealing with losses is something that's pretty hard to do just in general. Like, a lot of good players struggled with this.
Yes.
And I had my own moments even after a pretty long career of like when I had my worst year ever, when Paulo had his worst year ever. Like, both Paul and I had the experience of going from platinum to silver after playing a whole year, all the tournaments. And that's brutal, right? Like, you think you're good and you think like, oh, I understand everyone has they have losing streaks and all that stuff. And then all of a sudden it's not until you actually are faced with the year where you win 30% of your matches that you have to be like, oh, okay, I guess I get it. It's tough. So that's something I think a lot of people don't fully factor in either. Um, and then, of course, making decisions under pressure is a huge part of it. I mean, part of that is also like you kind of have to. I mean, you can deal with whatever way you want. Everyone's different, but I often don't even feel the pressure. Like when I'm playing in one of these high stakes matches, it doesn't feel like pressure to me until afterwards or like right before the match, because then I do actually feel it. But for most of the time, it's just not a thing that I really think about. Like, yeah, I'm playing a high stakes match, but I don't know. I'm just going to do my best. Like, yeah, I remember giving this advice to a friend of mine who really wanted to get better and was trying really hard and all that, right? And he was like, how do you deal with the pressure, and like every time I get a feature match or every time even I'm at the late tables of a PTQ and everyone's watching me, I get nervous.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you got to just remember that every match is the same. You're trying to make the best decisions within the match to try to win the match. And when you're in a spot where you're thinking about what's going to happen if you win or lose the match, you're already kind of like in the wrong mindset. Like this is, you really need to not do that. You need to be in the spot where you think about what can I do to win this game? Not, okay, if I lose this, I have to do X to top 8 or whatever.
Right. What about the selection or survivorship bias stuff? Have you seen that happen in Magic where, I don't know, maybe somebody was really good back in the day when it was a little easier to be really good and they're just kind of, that's how they got on the train that they're on now?
There is, it's not quite the same as in gambling, I don't think.
Okay.
Like where, yes, I know that, someone runs hot, they can really, they can ride that for quite a while, right?
Yeah.
Like that can be the sort of thing, like they really kind of get their value from that and then move on. But in Magic, it takes too much sustained success. Like, look, we all know the person who like top 8s the Pro Tour and then, 6 months later aren't qualified for any tournament.
Yeah.
And that can definitely happen. That's not something that, it is uncommon, I guess. But most people don't end up thinking like, oh, wow, this person's great when that happens. Like, it's pretty clear what happened there. The one thing I will say is if that does happen, then you start to think that someone's cheating. Like Magic has had an unfortunate string of like people who, let's just put it this way. When someone comes out of nowhere and starts winning a lot, like I really like to watch their games and try to see like, okay, what's going on? Because I remember Jared Betcher's always my favorite example here, right?
Yeah.
And so Jared Betcher, he comes out of nowhere, starts winning a ton. And I remember getting really frustrated because I looked and I watched his games and I'm like, how is this guy winning so much? Like, I don't understand any of his plays. I must really be losing touch. Like, because this is the same time I was losing all the time. I'm like, wow, am I just bad now? Is that it? And it's just, no, it turns out he was actually just cheating because he played poorly and was cheating.
And it was literally manipulating his library.
Yes, he was literally doing that. And it was just like, all right, well, I guess I kind of understand now a little bit better what's going on. But
yeah,
Magic doesn't really have that because, like, I don't know. With poker or sports betting, like, in poker, you can definitely say, like, why did you make this play? This was a terrible play. For sports betting, it's a little harder because they're like, well, I had these reasons as to why this team was going to win, and I won my bet. So, like, how much, how badly can you doubt me or whatever?
Yeah.
Whereas in Magic, it's like, I guess maybe if I was better at both either sports betting or poker, I could speak to that a little better. But in Magic, you can really watch someone and be like, wow, this person does not know what they're doing. They must have gotten lucky, with enough reps. I imagine poker, you watch someone play who wins the first tournament, the Chris Moneymaker effect or whatever, and then you watch them play for another 3 months and you're just like, oh, no, you got lucky.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not even that the person has to be terrible. It's just, it doesn't suit them necessarily. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of like you don't really fit this lifestyle, like somebody who gets super frustrated at every loss, right? Like, that's going to be a really bumpy road for them, to be a poker player because or Magic, because of what you said. And it's like, you kind of, I look at people like that and I go, how did you end up here? Like, you take this really hard and you just feel like that would naturally get weeded out. You would either learn to accept it or you would just leave the game. And it's often because they had some big score at the beginning and they're kind of chasing that. Next one is huge and definitely translates. It's work well with incomplete information. He says that the people that are successful at this type of thing tend to avoid hindsight bias, meaning, looking back,
thinking.
Exactly. And focusing on what was known at the time. And then also he put a note in there. He said most people are terrible at this. Like average people just are really bad at working with incomplete information.
That's my experience too. I don't know. I can tell when I'm talking to someone in the course of my life and they'll say something and that's just like, oh, you're not in the mind space of like making assumptions. Like, oh, how could you know that? It's like, well, look, I don't know that, but I can make a best get. I can, you don't want to trot out terms like Bayesian probability or whatever. Like,
right.
Like that makes you just look like a complete jerk. But like when you can say like, well, look, I'm just going to walk you through it. The starting probability of this is, we know that it's like about 50-50.
Yeah.
But now I know that, they're like, let me think of an example. Okay. Here's an example. Like, like how late is this person going to be? Well, the normal drive takes about 30 minutes. It's been 40 minutes. So we can assume, and we know they left for whatever reason. So we can assume that there's something pretty remarkable going on, like an accident or a flat tire. Because otherwise, assuming we just know for a fact, we saw on our Ring doorbell, they left their house, got in their car, started driving over here.
Yeah.
Like, well, how can you know that? It's like, no, I don't know what happened, but I can make my best guess,
Right.
Like and it's just like, oh, this thing's that, I don't know. There's just so many ways that comes up in your life where you know what the starting conditions are and something is different and you can make your guess as to what happened in between. Yes. And people are just not interested in opening that box or incapable of doing so.
Right. Because they don't know that missing in between piece. Right. And you're willing to say, well, they might have stopped for ice. Right. They may have gotten pulled over. They may have gotten in an accident. They may have a flat tire. Maybe they got an emergency call. There's a number of things, but we know, okay, it's within this group, but people just aren't comfortable with the fact that they just don't know exactly what happened. And, people that do this more analytical approach will be like, well, something happened. We can fill in that box, but we know that like they would have been here by now unless, there was some other thing. So I'm willing to narrow it down to these few things,
I think it's a combination of people not being equipped because you have to be kind of taught this, right? Whether it's by experience or a lecture or reading a book or any of these things. And by people being really uncomfortable by making assumptions, because assumptions, it's funny, assumptions get a bad rap. When you assume, you make it an ass out of you and me. What happens when you leap to assumptions and all that.
Right.
And it's like, well, if you do it badly, sure.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
But if you do it well, there can be tons of value for you because, well, in social situations, you can maybe look smart if you do it the right way, or you could have a better outcome in all sorts of situations. And I think part of it is you have to know what the stakes are. And you have to know what the punishment is. Like, I'm not going to, like, you can make a guess if, like, for example, you can make a guess if someone speaks Spanish, right? I can, sometimes I'll guess and I'll just speak to someone like, let's say, this is a common one, right? At a restaurant, you speak to them in Spanish. You go to a Mexican restaurant, your waitress comes over and you can talk in Spanish, right? And that sometimes can make the whole situation easier. You go to a taco truck and they wouldn't speak to me in Spanish because I don't look like I speak Spanish, even though I do. We're both making assumptions there, but the stakes are relatively low. What happens if I speak to someone in Spanish and they don't speak Spanish?
Right. They just go, "Oh, I don't speak Spanish." Yeah.
They tell me I don't speak Spanish.
Yeah.
I don't look like a jerk, know?
No.
Like it just is whatever. That's pretty normal. On the other hand, like the whole Sherlock Holmes thing where he's like, well, I can see from your tan you were recently, fighting in this war because whatever. When you're meeting the principal of your kid's school for the first time, you're not going to make an assumption that like, oh, you're wearing this watch, you therefore this, and you say something grossly out of proportion. But there's a lot of situations where an assumption is going to make you make the best decision. You don't have to make bad decisions just because you don't know.
Yeah.
And look, this goes back to skin in the game. If the consequence, like an early example is of me making an assumption is basically nil and the upside is positive, we can communicate better. That's a great assumption to make. If the consequence of an assumption is I lose $10,000 or I get hurt or someone else gets hurt or your car gets towed, like I don't assume when I park somewhere I don't know and there's a bunch of signs, I'm not going to ignore them. I go read the signs. I don't assume I know what's going on.
Right.
Because the consequence of my car getting towed or even me getting a ticket, well, a lot worse than me reading the sign. But there's a lot of places that you can make assumptions and have just a better life as a result.
Yeah, and it's normal shortcutting to do so. It's, the real question is, are these informed assumptions, right? Are you doing this based off of some reasonable set of factors, or are you just saying, I just kind of hoped it would go well. I didn't really have a reason to think that, and then it didn't, right? That's where those assumption sayings come in and make you look kind of silly, Next one, this one's right up our alley. They focus on process, not results. So that's, don't be roddy, results-oriented thinking. One that Ryan, really christened at the beginning was DNR, decisions, not results, right? That's how we approach things here on LR. And that is, according to Nate Silver, fundamental to people who are successful at this type of thing. Skilled gamblers are usually somewhat aware of the role that luck plays. Unskilled gamblers are totally unaware. And he says that people who do well at this can displace emotions in a way that is unnatural for most people. And that's just like right up our alley, right?
Totally. Like I mean, we've harped on results-oriented thinking so much because it's just like a core part of not only winning at Magic, but just I think being a more effective person, a
Yes.
person who gets better results. Like at the end of the day,
Totally.
And look, we've all had those matches where you made a big mistake, you did something poorly, and you still won, and you feel like you got away with something because you did.
Yes.
Ideally, you learn from that. You don't make that mistake again. You don't say, oh, I won, therefore that was a good play. Like I've won plenty of matches off of bad plays, off of a play I make, and I'm like, oh, wow, that was a huge mistake. But it actually worked out really well because now they played. I mean, my last match at Worlds in 2016 was like a perfect example of this. I fetched the wrong land on an earlier turn. You might have been in the booth for this actually. And I'm playing against Steve Rubin. I'm playing like a, black, green, white, like rock, Jund sort of deal Hobbs on. And he's playing Eldrazi. And I was at 3 life and I couldn't cast a Tarmogoyf in my hand because I fetched the wrong land earlier. So instead I had to cast Thoughtseize. And the Thoughtseize took Rest in Peace out of his hand, which made my in-play Tarmogoyf a 5/6, and it meant he couldn't cast it and kill my Tarmogoyf effectively.
I remember this.
He had a Reality Smasher and played, and he was just going to win the game if I cast Tarmogoyf. He would have cast Rest in Peace and I would have died.
I totally remember this now.
And it was straight up a mistake. He had 1 card in hand, and it was like turn 6. There's no way I should have cast Thoughtseize over a 4/5 Goyf.
Right.
But because I had made a mistake earlier, I made a play that actually won me the game, even though it shouldn't have. And
totally.
Do I look back at that and think, wow, I was such a genius? No, of course not. I think, wow, I'm a lucky idiot. That's what I think. And that's just... That's the thing is you have to be good to know when you got lucky too. What's more infuriating than losing to someone who got really lucky and are not even aware of it?
Oh,
at least have the grace to the understanding to know that you got lucky to beat me.
Absolutely. Totally.
And you've seen me on stream cackling my head off when I'm the one getting lucky and I know I shouldn't win this, but I just top deck twice in a row. And you know what? At the end of the day, that does determine that match. But yeah, your life, honestly, if I could give LR listeners like one piece of advice to make their life better, it is try to make the best decisions you can and try to separate those decisions from the results that happen as best you can. And just try to continue improving the first part and hoping that the second part will come. If you make good decisions in your life, the more good decisions you make, the better results you're going to get.
It's so
You're going to get bad results sometime because of luck, because of things you didn't know. But as long as you keep learning from them and keep improving your process, you're just going to get better at everything you do.
It's true. And, what I've noticed over the course of life, seeing other people and myself, make decisions along these lines and also not, is that our human lifespans are long enough, and the way that our societies and our lives play out is that we do actually get to make enough decisions, from small ones day to day to bigger picture life decisions, that if you can manage to focus on the decision part of it and not the result part of it and just keep hammering, you will see the uptick come. It doesn't necessarily come on any given individual decision or even a couple of groups of decisions, but I just have never seen this fail for somebody who committed to really trying to focus on what is the information I have and how can I make the best decision, no matter what their starting point, ending point, anything. It was, if you do that, you will slowly, sometimes quickly, if you get lucky, you will raise up. It sometimes takes a while. These things aren't, necessarily overnight type deals, but especially if you put it in like a sandbox, like Magic, you can, it's funny, like talking about betting. Let's say you and I, Luis, took two comparable beginning Magic players. And one of them, we said, this is the method that you're going to use. You are going to put every bit of emphasis on your decisions, and you are going to de-emphasize your results to the most that you can. And the other person, we just didn't say any of that to and just let them go. Like, I would bet everything on the first person every time. And I think it's that powerful. I just do. And I think it translates to every part of your life. It translates to relationships, to money, to career stuff, to day-to-day happiness. Like, it honestly does. It's really interesting because, I had a huge clarifying moment for this through poker. This is what taught me this. I was able to carry it over to when I learned Magic to help me speed up that process a bit and then sort of translate it out to my life the best that I can. To be clear, it is difficult to do this. It is difficult. This isn't easy. But being aware of this paradigm is so huge. I remember specifically that I would be at the casino playing poker. This is when I was playing for part of my living. And I would face a very difficult situation where somebody would go all in and I'd have to be decided if I'm going to call or not. And I'd take my time and I'd think it through. And I would say, okay, here's what I know. Here's what they did before the flop. Here's how they acted post flop. They did follow up with a bet. Then they checked. I've seen them do this before. It wouldn't really make sense for them to have this. My odds are roughly this. I think this is a time when I'm supposed to call. Okay. Like, pretty clearly, not like slam dunk, get my money in there, but like, I'm not going to fold. This is a call. So I would say call. And then I would like order food. And in the meantime, the hand is ending and there's like $1,500 at play. And I'm like, should I get the pho? How's the burger tonight? Right. And then I would order and then I would be like, who won? Like, did I win? Like, are they shoving the pot over to me or did the other guy get it? Right. And it was because that wasn't the important part. Like, whatever card, like, I want to see what they had because I can use that as a bit of information to check against myself. But like, the card that came out on the river, I had no control over that. It didn't matter. And I was very comfortable with the decision I had made. And then there's a level of curiosity and a level of sort of data mining to, well, what did you end up having? But I could find that out in a minute. I didn't need to like, where if you watch people play poker when they go all in, it's very natural so that they're now completely transfixed by what's going to come out on the river because that's going to dictate whether they won the hand or not. And I was able to disconnect from that and order food because in my mind, the decision that I had made was where all the focus was. And the rest was just that will happen thousands of times over the course of my poker career where this last card will come out and one or the other of us will win. And I'm betting on the fact that I'm going to make a better decision than my opponent more often than they are. And that was what I had done. Right. And people at the table would be like, dude, you're still in it. Like, the hand's not over. I'm like, well, I don't have any more decisions to make. So I'm going to make a decision about dinner. Right. And I remember that feeling very much like I get this now. I really get it. I have successfully moved up my decision process earlier and put all my focus where I could actually be actionable and not on what came out in the wash. And it's easier with poker because you play so many hands that, like I said, like, this is going to happen thousands of times to me over the course of my poker career. So I don't need to like harp on every single one about did I win this all in tonight? Right now it's different in real life where like you're making a decision about like buying a house or a relationship thing or a job thing or, a bigger financial decision or something like that. Okay, fine. Like, we're all human beings. I'm not saying that, I never looked again at the river. Of course I do. Right. But when you realize that you can actually detach yourself to that level is where I feel like you really can start to level up and give that full focus to what you need. And by the way, the reason I brought it up is because Nate Silver said that people like this can displace emotions in a way that seems unnatural for most people. And that's what that was for me. And I'm an emotional person too. Like, I'm not cold-blooded about this stuff. I want to win. I want to beat that person. Like I said, I'm competitive. Also, I was playing for money that actually mattered to me. Like, it was my income. So, being able to do that represented a big step for me.
I mean, when it comes to pro Magic players, it's not that pro Magic players don't have emotions. A lot of people, especially when they watch the tournaments, like when they had live tournaments, like most people kind of play and don't really show a whole lot, right?
You're like that.
And,
yeah.
Yeah. And it's not that I don't care about the results or I don't care about what happens, win or lose and all that. It's that you can't care too much about that during the game because you need to be focused. And if you're not able to focus, you're not going to do well. So the people who can't do that get weeded out. They stop showing up because they don't succeed. And the people who can do that learn how to do that better.
Yes.
So it's something you really do need to have as part of your repertoire, which is like you got to be able to, if not, kind of dampen those emotions, at least delay them to the point where they will help you as opposed to not.
Yeah. And I do want to make one other point here, which is that we're not, our point isn't to dehumanize, right? Two examples of this. One of them is one of the reasons that I went away from poker eventually. There was a few of them, but one of them was it is an emotional roller coaster and it sucks having that level of emotional roller coaster be your job. And so it did affect me, winning, losing and stuff like that, even if I was able to find pockets where I could sort of pull myself away from it at the table. And also this is true for Luis, where like when I used to watch Luis on the streams before I really knew him, I'm like, well, that guy's just cold. Like, he's like, good game, and it's like he took some devastating loss that bumped him out of top 8 and he would just shake hands and say, good luck in the next round. And it was like, wow, like that guy's, man, ice cold veins or whatever. And then I actually met him and I would see him after he took a tough loss. And while I still have to say that like you are actually very good at that, even relative to the other Magic players, I got to see, no, that hurt. Like he wanted that. It's going to take him half an hour to kind of just process through, let it sit. And then, to your credit, we could be at dinner. Hell, sometimes you jump in the booth with me, not that long after, and you would be okay. So your recovery and the way you handle it, I think is admirable and very good, but it did matter to you. And it was an emotional thing. And it wasn't, you didn't walk away just going like, hey, let's go get some French fries. You were devastated. Like you have to build back up again, right?
Look, all I'm saying is if you ever leaked the group chat with me, you and Chion, then people would see.
That's right.
I care about my wins. It's something I've talked about plenty, which is like, it's good to care. I do know Magic pros who stop caring. And I think that's bad for them. Even if they can continue to play at a professional level, like that's fine. These people are good enough and they've done it long enough that like they'll still make all the right plays or whatever. Caring is what kind of puts the spice into it.
Yes.
If I didn't care about these tournaments, I would not play in them.
Right.
I don't play at this point, I don't have to play in them. It's not really my job anymore. I love doing it and I play in them because I care about the outcome and I want the outcome to be good. And if it's not, then I get frustrated and I don't try to figure out what I can do better. So
exactly. And I think the skill that you developed was not having that express itself at the table where it could interfere with your decisions, right? You saved it for after.
And I think that's, you got to bottle up all your emotions and then
and then explode on somebody that's nearby. Next one is that the next trait is that these people are opportunistic. They have a strong situational awareness. They're aware of how to spend their attention, and that he also noted that overall mental and physical fitness can matter as well.
Yeah, that's something that I think we're actually finding out more and more of. Like, I do think like Magic tournaments have, a stamina component to them, especially live ones. The ones at home are a little less so because you just have, trust me, plenty of time between each round to decompress. Mm-hmm. But I, as someone who's gone up and down in terms of like where I'm at, like with my physical fitness level, like I did have a lot of good results after I really started taking it seriously. I do think that, that having a good awareness of yourself and like your energy levels and what you're doing to have stamina does matter.
Yeah. And then I think that what he's getting at with the opportunistic and self-awareness about situational self-awareness and where to spend your attention is that, I think that there's a lot of people who are kind of just on cruise control with a lot of stuff, right? Like if you have a regular job and kind of a regular routine, you're not really looking for opportunities, right? You're more just like kind of, I got to show up at work. I got to do my thing. I've got plans after this, and then I'm going to go home, hang out. I'm going to go to sleep. I'm going to wake up. I'm going to do that again. You know, I think we've all had times in our life that we're like that. I know I have too. But he's saying people like this are a little more on the lookout for an opportunity, right? They're a little more like, hey, there's something I might be able to get into. A way that expresses itself for gamblers is like if there's a new form of gambling, like a new poker game that gets popular, or a website opens up that wasn't available to you, or something like that. A new casino, right? They're looking for these things, you know, they're looking for these opportunities to kind of jump in and see if they can get in there and figure out what the next new thing is. And I think that that's, you know, for Magic doesn't translate directly over, but sometimes there's new formats that come out, or there's a new tournament series, or, you know, I think that Magic players generally do look for opportunities like that. They're not, you know, fully complacent in that way. So I think that's one that doesn't translate 100%, but like has some application.
I know some Magic players who built empires on finding the niche third party tournaments that people weren't paying attention to, and going and racking it up, and like that's nothing wrong with that, you know.
Yeah,
like
the same thing happens online, right? Where it's like, hey, nobody's playing the best of 3 Qs. I can, you know, get mythic at this now or whatever. This one's one of the most Luis intensive ones that I've seen here. It's apply practiced intuition. So he breaks it down into kind of 2 ways of thinking, fast and slow. So fast is like intuitive, emotional, your snap judgments, your initial impression.
Great book, by the way.
Yeah. What was it called again?
Thinking Fast and Slow.
Oh, I was talking about the other one that you recommended a while back that Blink is the
one you're thinking about, but there's literally a book called Thinking.
So he's referencing a book here. I did not recognize that.
Yes, that is what he's doing.
Okay, good. And so apparently in this book, fast is the intuitive, emotional snap judgments, and slow is the deliberate, rational, calculating type decisions. Now, this should be everybody who plays Magic should recognize this, right? These are, you will see both of these happen all the time with yourself and your opponent when you play Magic, where you know, you simply don't use the slow method on every single decision at Magic. It would just be too slow. But some do. It's true. And he recognizes though that slow is, quote, better, meaning that you can be more thorough, right? You can explore more edge cases. You can take a little bit more time to think. But he also notes that it's more mentally taxing, and that you want to try to outsource more tasks to the fast mode, right? To the mode where you kind of already have that decision made almost immediately. You just know that that's what you're going to do. And maybe also from this book, he put kind of a circle of life type thing where you grind, you hit mastery, you hit complacency, you reevaluate, then you grind, hit mastery, and you keep on that thing over and over again. But Luis, to me, when I read this one, this is one that I think about with you a lot. I think that, you know, you're probably the most intuitive Magic player I've ever watched play before, and I've ever had the chance to really talk to and get in the mind of. Huey's like this too, where I see you guys making really complex decisions really fast, and just knowing that it's right because you've practiced and trained and done this the 10,000 hours to put another book in there. And that lets you, when I see you slow down, when I see Huey do his patented fingers on the forehead, right? I know that is, you have now switched from that fast thinking to slow, where you're actually saying, okay, I need to take a minute here to really dive deep. This to me is like the most Luis of all of these.
Yeah. I mean, this is, I've spoken at length about how I feel my game got quite a bit better when I learned about this, and that remains true. Like it's a double-edged sword, you know, because sometimes I do run into the issue of, if I'm not practiced enough, I mean, a big part of this is being able to have a lot of practice underlying your intuition. And when I'm not there, I run into problems because, I do need that in order to function. But that isn't to say that that my intuition isn't a huge part of my game at all points. Just because I do take time to think. I mean, there's definitely times when you've seen me slow down and think for a while.
Yes.
It's just not that often because, especially when I've really practiced, I just have all the easy decisions or even like the medium decisions already decided, already figured out. I know what I'm going to do. And that's just a huge, I think, edge I get because a lot of people, they're scared to trust their intuition because that's not a natural thing to do. A lot of people are scared to, and actually The Gift of Fear is a really good book too, I would recommend.
Okay.
And it's using that to the context of what is fear telling you, but that's another form of subconscious messaging, right? Mm-hmm. Where people who, when they get a bad feeling about something, they're like, no, I'm out. I got a bad feeling about this.
Yes.
I'm going to go remove myself from the situation. I'm not going to buy this house or make this investment. I'm not going to hire this person. I'm not going to work at this job or whatever. Or I'm going to leave this party. I'm going to get out of this alley, like that sort of thing. Like, there's a ton of different situations where this can manifest. And that's because your subconscious is really good at figuring out things that your conscious mind might not be able to. Mm-hmm. And it can be kind of scary to put yourself in that position because you're used to having, well, first of all, you have the illusion that you have free will, right? That's a whole other topic. But you're used to having the thought that I know what action I'm doing and I'm thinking about all my actions and I'm deciding all my actions. And kind of outsourcing that to your intuition can be a little scary. You're letting your subconscious drive. You're giving it the keys to the car. Yeah. But at the end of the day, your subconscious is really, really good at things. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them some of them are just base things. And some people have better, are better tuned to this more than others. Right. But some people have a really good spidey sense, right, when it comes to like something that's going to be bad or like something that's going to be dangerous. And it's especially people, I would imagine, who've grown up in situations where there's lots of dangerous things happening. They're more likely to be able to pinpoint those, even if they could not explain to you why. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of Magic players who will make a play and not be able to explain to you why that is. Yeah. And while I would say I'm pretty good at, like, if I make a play and you ask me, wait, stop, why did you make that play? I could tell you why I made that play.
You can, but I also notice you restructuring it.
Yes.
Like, it wasn't that you thought through each and everything. It's
I can reverse engineer it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And sometimes the answer is also, oh, I think they have this card in hand. You're like, why? And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I do.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
and that's one of the places I could just see a tangible gain is. I remember talking to Mike Jacob about this. He plays tons of sealed, right? And he'll do this thing where he'll play around rares, and people will, on the stream, be like, "Why are you doing that?" And he's like, "I think they have this rare," and they're like, "How could you know that?" He's like, "Well, I don't know that, but I play enough sealed, and I play this format a lot, and I think they have this rare." Mm-hmm. And more often than not, more often than just based on probability of like, what are the odds they have a given rare, pretty low, they do. And my win rate went up when I started doing things like, wow, I really feel like they have this sweeper. Why do I feel that? I don't know, but I do. So I'm going to play around it because my subconscious, I've been playing this format a lot, and that's a key. I'm well practiced. My subconscious is telling me this. I'm not going to ignore it just because I don't know why it's saying that. Yes. And the better you get at something, the better your subconscious is going to be. It can lead you astray for sure. It's not infallible, but when you are practiced, your subconscious is such a powerful tool. Yes. And I believe I've gotten ahead of a lot of people because I'm very willing to just trust it and make the plays I think I should make. And I can slow down and figure out why those plays are, but I've actually found it better in a lot of cases not to do that.
Just to cruise. Yeah. And you get into that flow state at some point where you're just
the flow state is it's not only super important, it's also really, like, it feels really good.
It does, but it takes work because, again, I'm going to read this one again that he said, and you mentioned this too. It's apply practiced intuition. Yes, Luis happens to be the most intuitively capable player I've seen play the game. Okay, but he's also like top 5 best all time, right? So you don't have to compare yourself to somebody with that level. Like, Luis is like a savant level player at this. Like, the pro players go, how the hell do you do this? Like I had people saying that kind of stuff to me before I even met you, Luis. And, so you're kind of a unicorn in that way, but this applies to everybody. You don't have to be at Luis's level of it. We're all on that track. And think about when you first started playing and you had to look at your whole hand and you couldn't even figure out what land to play because you didn't really know what it meant. Now you just put a land down and maybe you have one consideration for the civil servant and that's the only thing. And you're just playing lands. When you first started playing, did you attack with your 2/2? Probably not. You didn't really know what to do. Now you're just like, get in there for 2, play my land, play my 3-drop, go. You didn't think about any of that stuff. That's just like ding, 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 right? Or maybe there was one consideration. You made that choice and then bang, you followed through with the rest of the play pattern. You do that. I remember the moment for me when I realized that I had been able to start offloading stuff onto my subconscious was when I didn't forget to ping somebody on end step with a pinger, right? When I would always have to like, I'm going to forget. I'll put a thing on my library. And at some point it just started happening where I'd just be like, ping you, do this. And it was just there. Right. And I didn't have to remember it consciously so I could focus on other parts of the game. And then when my opponent said go, even if they took a long turn, even if a lot of stuff happened, I'd be like, ping you. Right. And I wasn't thinking about it before they said go. It's just my brain learned how to offset it. So you will be doing this, but as Luis referenced here, you have to practice it. You have to put in the work behind it to get to that point because your intuition isn't calibrated perfectly off the bat. Luis's isn't, nobody's is. The more you practice, the more patterns you get a chance to let that part of your brain see. And the more, you can offload those tough decisions.
There's two things with this. One is that by buying myself the time and not even just literal time where like a judge won't harass me because I've been playing fast or whatever, but also just the mental bandwidth, by offloading all exactly, slow is better, but mentally taxing, the more sources I can offload to fast, that lets me sit there and come up with like the really hard to get to plays, the really outside of the box plays. And those, I believe, are what separates, the Nassifs from the person who plays technically correct, right? The MTGO grinder who just doesn't make mistakes. There are some people like that. And you need that in order to get there. I mean, I remember watching Owen Turnwald play a lot, and he went from the MTGO grinder dude who just did not make mistakes to someone capable of making like elite level plays.
Right.
And there is a difference there. And I believe part of, at least for me, the reason I can do that and was able to do that was because I didn't have to think about 90% of the game.
Yes.
I spent most of my brain power thinking about the really exceptional parts, which you also have to identify. There's not a sign saying, here, it's time to make a good play.
Yes.
And then the second is you've maybe watched me play more Magic than anyone else.
Probably.
I think that actually is feasible.
Yeah.
You can tell when I'm dialed in and when I'm not.
Absolutely.
Right? You've seen plenty of evidence of both.
Uh-huh.
When I'm dialed in is when my intuition is just like humming.
Yes.
And I'm at my worst when I'm not, because when I'm in a point where I can't trust my intuition, it really messes with my plays.
Yes, so it does. Because that's your style. Your style is to play intuitively, but if your intuitions aren't delivering the right results back, then it throws the whole balance off.
It's kind of like, there's some basketball players, right? They're known for their really physical play, and they do not age well.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And for me, I'm so practiced at using my intuition that when that's not a tool I can harness to its full potential, I suffer more than someone who maybe doesn't do that and is just focused on like thinking throughout everything, making the plays the same way every time.
Yes, because you have a much higher peak, Number 10, we've got two more. Are structured thinkers. So people who are successful at these type of endeavors are structured thinkers. And here's what he says. He says they want to understand the process, not just the outcome. So we've talked about that a lot here. Obviously it's massive, and it's one that we talked about a couple points back, the results. And this is a similar version of that. The decision, not the results, the process, not the outcome, similar stuff. They're good at using heuristics. We've done a few episodes on heuristics. We love them here. And this is important, he said, but they understand their limitations. And this to me is exactly what you were just talking about, right? This is the, say for a good pro player, I understand the 80% play intuitively. Like I don't need to really sit down and think about it. I can just make that play. I get it. And that's it. But if I played that way the entire time, yes, I would be a good Magic player. Like you said, I wouldn't be making mistakes, but that has a limit, right? That heuristic of I'm going to make the 80% play every time. has a limit where when you do need to break from that norm, as you just talked about, Luis, you're giving up equity by not saying, okay, this is the limit of this heuristic. I need to set that aside and I need to actually address this particular situation as a novel situation that I need to really put my brain power to and not just come up with this sort of shortcut answer. And then, and then the last one of this structured thinkers point is their philosophical nature can make them highly opinionated. That does definitely translate to Magic players.
Yes. I love heuristics. I'm obsessed with them because it goes back to me wanting to like outsource as much of my brain power as possible. And part of that though is I'm not just, it's not like I close my eyes and let heuristics take the wheel. I use heuristics, but I'm always like doing this little spot check. Is it correct to use the heuristic here? And when the answer is no, I hope that I catch myself, and I usually do. But you can get into trouble with that, of course. But yeah, heuristics are awesome, and always wanting to improve is like a really important part of really being good at anything.
Yes.
Not all of these apply to everything, of course, but this is one that like basically, I don't know anyone who's a master at anything that doesn't really respect the process, as it were,
Yes,
like
totally.
It just like that's what it's all about,
Yes.
That things that come easily are usually not that impressive or that worthwhile. Like, I'm not saying if you're really talented and something comes easily, it's not worth it, but most people aren't virtuosos. I'm not a virtuoso. I didn't grow like one day understand Magic the way I do.
No, you had the right type of brain for it and then put in the work. Like, that's how I see how we came up with LSV, the pro Magic player, right? The top fiver, the like I described you as a savant earlier, right? I didn't mean that to say that you were born. I didn't mean to, say that you were, that this just all came naturally or easily. I think that you were that great combo. And you see this with sports all the time too, where somebody has a lot of athletic talent. Let's say we're talking about an NBA player. They grow up to be 6'7" or 6'8". So that puts them in a very small percentage of the population that's that tall. Yet they're also still very athletic. Sometimes taller people can get a little clumsy or a little, awkward or whatever. Yet they're not, right? They have a good build. They're fast. They can jump. They can do all these things. But then they started playing when they were younger. And then they got a coach or a trainer that said, okay, we're going to get in the gym every day and we're going to work on specific skills every day from the time that you're in 5th grade until the time that you're ready to leave high school. And now you've got an NBA prospect, right? But if that player was 6'7", great athlete and just never practiced, they're never making it to the NBA ever. Like, not even remotely close. And with somebody like you, that's how I view you. You have an incredible capacity for this intuitive stuff and intelligence and ability to use it in real time. But you needed to sit down with Paul Cheon in your guys' apartment and grind Magic Online for 3 years straight and do almost nothing else to build up.
To the detriment of my college studies, for sure.
Yeah, right. I mean, you did give up stuff for this, no doubt about it, right?
Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, that's how we ended up with you, right? And that's how, when you see players like that, don't ever think that they didn't work for it. If you see somebody in the NBA, if you see a Luis Scott-Vargas, it's really easy for people like me, like air quotes, just a normal person, to go, yeah, but I mean, Luis has one of those brains, right? Like, he does stuff I can't do, right?
Classic
it's like,
Marshall just selling himself short when you're the best Magic commentator of all time.
Okay, sure. Fine. You can say that, but I'm talking about Magic player here, right? Like, I don't have the ceiling that you have. And so it might be tempting for me to say, yeah, well, he's just one of the, or look at an NBA player and be like, yeah, well, I wish I was 6'9". I'm only 6'5". I couldn't make it to the NBA.
You have to be one of the true goats like Shaq to get away with not doing that much work.
Exactly. Like, he is an interesting example of somebody who, he's such a physical phenomenon. I'm sure he worked hard as well, but he stopped that at some point.
He also famously did.
Yeah, because maybe when he was younger. But
all this dovetails actually perfectly into the last point here, which is that they don't care much about money. They're in it for the love of the game. And that is 100% true, because when I've had people ask me, how do I become a professional Magic player? I don't just say don't, but I try to give them advice, but
it's in there somewhere.
But the answer really is kind of don't. Like, it doesn't really make sense to decide when you're 11 years old that you want to be a pro Magic player. Not that I decided when I was 11, but like I started getting obsessed with Magic when I was.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, it might have worked out well for me and plenty of other people who have gone on to use this as a springboard for a lot of really cool stuff. But none of us got into it because we thought the value was there, the money was there. First of all, we're talking about Magic. The money just isn't there. It still isn't. Like that never was the thing,
Right.
It's a little different when it comes to, professional gambling and poker, because the money is there. Like that, you can make millions. But I completely believe Nate Silver here. The people who I know who are best at poker really love it. Like the people who look, I know plenty of people who played when it was like kind of free money, 15 years ago, and they don't play now because like now it's work. But
yes,
the people who continue to play are the people who just really like that, doing that thing.
Yes.
And I don't know a single, elite level Magic player who didn't get into it for the love of the game and absolutely not for money. That's not to say that you, at some point you get burned out and then you're just like in this career and this is the thing that kind of lets you live comfortably and you don't love it. I can now name plenty of pros, or now former pros who didn't love it at the end of their careers, or once they reached that point. But everyone who got into it did ultimately love the game and love competition, like an earlier point said, and we're there because of that, not because the EV of playing Magic was good. I mean, it's still not. Well,
it's bad.
It never was really.
Yeah. To me, this one translates directly for those reasons. A good way to frame it would be, okay, there's love of the game, and then there's wanting to like prove yourself or prove other people wrong or show what you can do. Right. And like at the end of the day, every Magic player who reaches the highest levels could have applied that level of effort, the 10,000 hours. I mean, you went to school for political science?
Yep.
So what kind of jobs do people get with that generally? Like what would be a typical?
I mean, it's one of those kind of like liberal arts degrees where you can get a lot of different office type jobs that,
okay.
Like, yes, you could literally work on like a political campaign as like a strategist or whatever. But like mostly what that means is like that's the jumping off point to go to law school, which is one thing I actually considered at one point.
Okay.
That's where you become, a project manager or something like that. There's a lot of things you could do, all of which are way worse than what I ended up doing.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it worked out. but I'll tell you, let's say that you went down the law path and that type of stuff, right? And let's say instead of Magic, you and Paul got together for 6 hours every evening and you quizzed each other on the law and theories of the law and all of that stuff, right? And you did that for years on your own time, on your own dime, at the expense of whatever else you could have been doing with your time. You could be trying to be this, the attorney general or something, right? You could have put yourself in a position to be extremely successful in any endeavor that you had put this much effort into, right? But it was because you love doing this, right? That's why you did it.
Yes and no. Like, yes, what you're saying is correct, but I don't actually think that's possible because you can't fake passion. The reason we did this was because we were passionate about this. Passion and obsession are very close together, and and I don't like, some people might have this characteristic who are like a lawyer or a doctor or whatever, top of their field, and they don't love it. They just do it because they thought this was going to be the best outcome for their life and they can just buckle down and do it. And hats off to those people. I hope they're happy. I don't really know many people like that. Mm-hmm. I'm not like that. I don't think you're like that. No. Like the things we are good at are the things we're passionate about. And to some degree, you don't really get to choose those. Like, yes, of course, you decided to get into watches, or I stumbled upon Magic and like there was some element of minor choice. But again, I didn't choose to have Magic grab a hold of me like it did, but it did.
Right.
And you know what? I thank my lucky stars at the end of the day that it was Magic that did that and not some other game, because most games don't have the robust tournament scene that Magic did that allowed me to do what I did. If I got as obsessed with Street Fighter as I was with Magic, I believe I would not have had a very good outcome from that, because Street Fighter competitive scene really is like, yes, there are some people who do well for themselves, and that's awesome. I love watching them. Like I do watch those on on Twitch or whatever. But That's just not a feasible thing. Like Wizards of the Coast, like rolled out the red carpet comparison to a lot of the fighting game companies who, like, Nintendo stops people from running Smash tournaments.
Yes, they actually don't
like,
want them to. Yeah.
Right. And, well, given the Smash community that has had its own troubles, maybe they're not the worst decision on Nintendo's part, but that's neither here nor there. At the end of the day, I didn't choose this. Again, it's not like I don't think I have free will, but like I really didn't choose to have Magic, kind of hit me the way it did. It was the perfect brainworm for me, and I really just kind of poured myself into it, and I'm lucky that it worked out, but I'm under no illusions that it had to be that way or could easily not have been that way.
Totally. And to me, it just comes down to like, so they don't care that much about money. That's definitely true, right? If you're playing Magic, you can't love money that much because it's so expensive to play the game. You got to love the cards.
The vast majority of our listeners have no expectation or shot of having Magic be positive sum in terms of money. That's not to say it's not worth doing. It still remains the best game ever made. It's an awesome hobby. You're lucky that you get to play Magic. It's such a cool thing to do. It's so fun. But I mean, you're in it because you love it. That at the end of the day, that's it,
Yeah. And I hope it brings comfort to people who think, should I be doing something else? To say that even the people who are doing this gambling and this high level monetary stuff, at some point they just view it as keeping score. They're not really in it, to try to just like, because at some point, if you're like a really high successful gambler or poker player, you've made enough money that like, well, what more do you want? Right. It's like, well, I'm doing this because I want to. I mean,
what is Justin Bonomo, the winningest poker player of all time, doing this summer? Well, he's playing in a bunch of poker tournaments.
Exactly.
Does he need the money? Absolutely not.
Of course not. Right. So there you go. All right. Well, great stuff, Luis. This was really fun. And I want to say thanks to Nate Silver. We kind of ripped off his presentation.
He's Magic adjacent. I know some people who know him, like
he's
Magic,
awesome.
Poker, all those worlds are like a lot of Venn diagrams,
I'll tell you, he would fit in on this podcast very well. I think he would feel very much at home here.
One of our good friends was in a game night with him, like a board game night, and didn't even realize it till like halfway through.
Oh, that's so cool. I love that guy. Yeah, that's my type of person. Those are the type of people that you can find in the Magic and poker communities that are less commonly found outside of it. And I just love listening and interacting with people like that who are really trying to figure stuff out, kind of from first principles. At any rate, that's going to do it for this episode of the show. We hope you enjoyed it. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is L. So you want to thank our sponsors, channelfireball.com for all your Magic needs and FTX for all of your digital currency needs. Make sure you check them out and give them support. We thank them for supporting the show. If you want to find anything related to the show, it's lrcast.com. That's going to do it for this one. We'll see you next time. So kind of expanding on the main topic, one of the points stood out to me of, they seem to kind of repress their emotions or have a odd emotional response. I have a story of, let's say, I'm not going to name names, but this Magic player, everyone loves him on Twitter, where, outside the tournament, he has the same attitude of inside of like not really factoring emotional responses into things. And I remember once everybody loves him on Twitter. Yeah.
We were having dinner, the whole team CFB, and he decided to rank everyone in terms of drafting ability. And first of all, this is like well after we had our infamous like house rankings that went completely sideways, and obviously we shouldn't have done them. Like, what the original story on that was Brad was writing an article for SG and just decided to rank our team, and that just dominated like over a day of discussion. Ended up with a lot of people being very angry.
Yes.
Not a good idea. So then somehow this player on our team decides to rank everyone in terms of drafting ability, and unsurprisingly, the person he ranked last got very angry. And he was befuddled. He's like, "Why? I don't understand why you get mad. This is an accurate list. You're very good. Of course, everyone on the team is good, but you're, I think demonstrably worse than everyone else on the list." And it's just like trying to explain, like,
but shouldn't the person have been thankful that the other people pointed out this thing so that he could fix it? That's actually the attitude we're talking about here.
Yes, that actually is. And it's interesting having the conversation of like, you can say these things that are true. That doesn't mean that they aren't something that will make someone feel bad. But why would you feel bad though? This is factual. You can do something to work for it. It's not like a reflection on your character. It's like,
I had a conversation with that person, by the way, and I said, did you ever have a time when you were young and you didn't get picked for a team or you got picked last? And he said,
and what
yes.
did Ben say?
He said, yes. He said, yes. And I said, well, didn't, as a young person, not, super emotionally stable yet, like, did it hurt your feelings or did you feel left out or, something like that? And he said, no, I was the smallest.
Yeah. And
hey, you get points for consistency, I guess.
Yeah, no. And in some ways that is a better way to live your life, like for yourself. Right. Like, but part of, I think, trying and Ben is actually better at this now. This was 15 years ago or whatever.
He actually is. Yes.
I hate to say how, no, it was like 11 years ago, but either way, long time. But understanding that other people have different emotional responses is, of course, part of growing up. When you're a kid, you don't even understand people have those at all, right? When you're a really little kid, you're the center of the world. As you grow up, learning that other people have these responses and how to like adjust for them and kind of empathize or work with them in the best way you can. Even if I do think it is good to like not get offended when someone ranks you last in something, I think you'd be generally happier if that wasn't something that bothered you. It's also just a very natural human response.
Especially
right?
Publicly.
Yeah, I mean, again, it wasn't very tactful or smart to do. I'm not arguing that part.
Yeah.
But this list did make me think about that. And well, there you have it.